Source: New Musical Express, 6th October 1979. Pick: Mike Laye. Caption: well, the guy in the Mac seems familiar, but the other two, no image, no style, no bullshit. If image is everything, The Cure are nothing, and they don't care. Deanne Pearson cares enough to talk to them. The Banshees split was last week's news. The outlook for the two bands, Siouxsie and the Banshees and support band The Cure, looked bleak. But they are already back on the road. The few dates they were forced to cancel have been rescheduled, no one misses out, and Siouxsie is smiling again. The Banshees have two new temporary members, Budgie, the ex-Slits drummer, and Robert Smith, The Cure's guitarist and vocalist, which, for him, means a grueling 2 sets a night for 6 weeks of almost consecutive dates. Shortly after this tour, The Cure are embarking on their own 2-week tour of this country, and then a 2-week European tour, hopefully including some recording for their next album in between. It is a daunting prospect, and the other two Cure members are understandably worried about the extra burden heaped on their frontman. They laugh and joke a lot, but can frequently be seen casting furtive looks at Robert, who is becoming increasingly detached and withdrawn, not moody or unfriendly, but always deeply engrossed in his own thoughts, thinking of the coming night's set, running through the chords and riffs of various Banshees numbers, making notes and disappearing to practice the numbers he hasn't yet learnt. At first, Robert dismisses it lightly, saying he'll be all right once he's learnt the Banshees set, but like the others, he doesn't really know whether he will or not. He looks ill, thin and pale, isn't eating properly, isn't sleeping properly, his mind a constant whir of activity. He doesn't want to let anyone down, least of all the Banshees. The Cure are still very much in awe of their situation. Everything has happened so quickly, from the initial success of their much-acclaimed single, Killing an Arab, to their landing the support slot on the Siouxsie and the Banshees tour, and the subsequent Banshees breakup. It was as much a disaster for them as for the Banshees, and they were willing to do almost anything to help and prevent the tour folding up there and then. But it is only now that they are thinking about the full implications of what they have undertaken. We were all shattered when it happened, Robert remembers. We just sat round after the Aberdeen gig and talked and drank and kept on drinking until 8 o'clock in the morning. I just felt that as long as we sat there, we could keep the whole thing going. And if I went to bed, then that'd be it, the end of the tour. And I just refused to let go. Siouxsie and Steve said not to worry. They had lots of friends who would fill in, and they'd start auditioning right away. And I said if they couldn't get a guitarist, then I'd play. And the fat man, Tolhurst, The Cure's drummer, even said he'd play drums if it came to that. Then a few days later, Siouxsie rang me up and said, would I come down and audition? And before I knew it, I was the Banshees guitarist. The fat man, on reflection, is glad that he wasn't asked to drum. It really would have been too much, he says. Drumming is much more physical than guitar playing, and I certainly couldn't have drummed for 1 hour and 3/4 to 2 hours every night. But I offered because we were desperate. There was nothing else for it. Both the fat man and Michael, Dempsey bassist, admit that the Cure's performance may well be suffering because, obviously, Robert is not able to give everything to their set alone now, but they refuse to criticize him in any way. It is something which they both accept. It was that or nothing, Michael says simply. The Banshees couldn't get another guitarist, and so either Robert played for them or that was that, the end of the tour. There was no alternative, and we'd all have done anything rather than let the tour come to a halt. Their determination is obvious. Whatever happens, they'll see it through to the end, because all three are in it together, and there is no way they can back out now. Surprisingly, though, their set has improved since the last time I saw them, at a warm-up gig at Aylesbury Friars a couple of weeks back. The sound there was bad, and I dismissed them lightly as 3 musicians with the technical know-how but little imagination. At the Apollo Theatre in Manchester, I was proved wrong. There is a lot more to their music. It takes more than one hearing to fully appreciate The Cure's music. There is an elusive seriousness and depth to it. The full force does not jump out and hit you in the face. It glides in the background, waiting to be discovered, because The Cure have nothing to project and promote their music. Unlike most bands, they have no image. That's why no one likes us, Robert says matter-of-factly, because we have no image. And he doesn't really seem to care, like he doesn't care when he introduces their last single, Boys Don't Cry, as the single that no one bought. He isn't angry or bitter, isn't even trying to make a joke out of it. He is just factual. Nobody did buy it. They probably didn't even listen to it because the Cure were never really there. I think people are disappointed because we have no image, he continues in the same monotone. There's nothing for them to identify with and imitate, like there is with The Clash, or the Ramones, or the Banshees, for example. Like I even wear the same clothes on stage for the Cure and the Banshees sets as I do off stage, and that's nobody's idea of a pop star. He smiles, a rare occurrence. I used to wear posy gear, though, whatever was the in thing to wear at the time. But those sort of clothes are always either too baggy or too tight, and I just like to wear clothes I'm comfortable in. In the early days of The Cure, they did have an image of sorts, a totally false, record company orientated image, according to the band, that quickly collapsed because none of the three believed in it. It was initiated and personified by their Three Imaginary Boys album cover, which featured three ordinary, everyday household appliances: a fridge, Hoover, and a lamp, with an obscure inner sleeve, which involved pairing up the three symbols with each member of the group, and various other appliances with each track on the album. The latter an impossible feat, which ended up with very few people knowing any of the track titles. This immediately gave The Cure an art school band label. It was impossible to envisage them as anything other than pretentious posers trying to be as obscure and contrived as possible. In fact, the exact opposite was true. Their idea was to have no image, to try and place the band in day-to-day reality, but it was an idea that did not work. It just seemed like a good idea at the time, Robert explains, when we were all new to the business. But it was someone else's idea, Michael adds emphatically, and it proved only detrimental to us. We had kids coming up to us asking us to explain our album, and we couldn't. How do you explain someone else's artwork to anyone? It's impossible, and that's when our prefabricated image began to crumble. Michael, to a certain extent, still subscribes to this image, though. He tries to come over as the more thoughtful, artistic member of the group and is more concerned with his appearance. But for the majority of the time, he can be found exchanging jokes and witty anecdotes with the Fat Man, so named because of his fatuous, banal comments, apparently, and making playful digs at Robert's seriousness and aloofness. But even then, he's concerned about his image in the presence of an outsider. I don't want people to think of the Fat Man and I as the Bruce Foxton and Rick Buckler of the band, as he sets his face again. You know, the two jokers. We're not really silly all the time. The band have also been labeled as a bunch of pseudo-intellectual, middle-class grammar or public school boys, which, as Robert points out, is also far from the truth. We all went to the same comprehensive school, he says, and I was the only one who stayed on after the 5th year, and I'm also the only one who comes from a fairly wealthy background. But the media couldn't bear us not to have an image, so they made one up. He is not annoyed, just treats it as an injustice so petty that it hardly seems worth talking about. And yet it would have been so easy for us to cultivate an image, he sighs. We could have dyed our hair pink and dressed up in leather or something, but then we'd have had to live up to that image all the time. And I just can't be bothered. Someone like Siouxsie really lives the part and is in full command of the situation, he says with undisguised admiration. And it works to her benefit. She's got her image honed off to such a point that it wouldn't matter what three musicians she had behind her. They'd still be Siouxsie and the Banshees to her fans. Whether all the attention is focused on Siouxsie or not, Robert still feels he may be letting the Banshees down because he is so ordinary. And sometimes I smile, he says apologetically. Like when Budgie and I make mistakes, we look at each other and grin. We can't help it. But that's not the Banshees' image, is it? They're supposed to be all deep and dark and brooding. Nevertheless, Robert enjoys playing with them. It's like getting a second chance on stage, he says. This is all new to us. The Cure, you see, playing such large venues. Every time I go on stage, it's a new experience. We also usually get to share the same hotel as the Banshees now, which is very exciting and more fun for all of us. Although I think the Banshees and the roadies and everyone think we're rather silly and naive at times, actually, he worries, because we all get so excited about things. Robert's deep-rooted admiration and respect for the Banshees is obvious. He is proud and flattered to be playing for them, but there is no chance of him joining them permanently. Because I'm playing other people's material, he says, and I'm not really happy unless I'm playing my own stuff. He has written almost all of The Cure's songs and lyrics, Michael and the Fat Man just adding the backline. Occasionally the Fat Man gives me some lyrics he's written, Robert adds, but I really don't like singing or playing anything unless it's my own. He is totally independent, very much an individual, and the other two accept this without question. Although Michael and the Fat Man tend to stick together, it is mainly because they are more gregarious than Robert. There is no rift between them, only a division that has always been there, even at school. Although we knew each other at school, we weren't really friends, Robert explains, because we didn't have much in common. Basically, it was because I played football at school and the other two didn't, and at 14, that was all that mattered. Now, all that matters for Robert is his music, something that has become even more important since undertaking his dual role on the tour. We only talk to each other on a very superficial level now, he says, cliquey jokes and witty comments at breakfast and so on, because you run out of things to talk about when you're constantly together all the time. But I don't get bored because I've got so many other things to think about. It is this seriousness and intensity, reiterated in his music, which makes it so difficult for many people to grasp. Robert is aware of this, as he is aware of the disadvantage of not having an image. But once again, he doesn't really care and is loath to do anything about it. He doesn't care if his songs are not hits. In fact, he's quite glad at the moment because at least the band have not become stigmatized. And he hopes that The Cure's next single, Jumping on Somebody Else's Train, does not get into the charts. Because I think we'll immediately be classed as just another group jumping on the bandwagon, he opines. I just know if this record gets anywhere, it'll be because people have taken it the wrong way, like the rest of our stuff. Jumping on someone else's train is about kids latching onto a certain type of music because it's the latest fashion, swapping their clothes and their records accordingly, like they have with this mod thing. Kids suddenly discarding their leathers and bondage for a two-tone suit, while jumping on someone else's train is deriding all that sort of stuff. But I think a lot of people might see it as capitalizing on it, he says pessimistically. Michael and the Fat Man, on the other hand, hope this one is a success. On a purely financial basis, Michael is honest about it, because we need the money at the moment. If we didn't, then I wouldn't really care either. But I want this band to be around in 3 years' time, and if it's going to be, then somewhere along the line, it's just got to make some money. It's a matter of simple necessity now. And if this tour falls through, they will need that hit record even more. A lot is at stake, and Robert is painfully aware that much of it rests with him at the moment. He is pushing on resiliency with a dogged determination. But I dreamt I packed it all in last night, he confides in me just before I leave, and it was such a relief.